This week we have another Popula Urbanum chat. We're talking to Dave from Reenactment Scotland, and we're hoping to talk about a couple of different topics. But first, before we go ahead, Dave, would you like to talk about yourself and Reenactment Scotland? How long have you been reenacting for?
Hi, I'm Dave from Reenactment Scotland. I reenact sort of 13th century sort of reenactment in Scotland, the sort of golden age of Scotland with sort of Robert the Bruce and William Wallace. I started Reenactment Scotland as a sort of page where people could find reenactment groups and events, and then I sort of went from there to expanding that into making video content to promote reenactment and reenactors.
Okay, so you yourself reenact, 13th century Scottish nobility, or is it sort of it's not really middle class per se in the 13th century Scotland? Is it the yeomanry? What do you depict?
I have based most of my impression I've gradually based it towards sort of the Crusaders' Bible, because it's kind of the sort of best sort of reference point for what people would have looked like in the 13th century, I think. And then I've wanted to really look like someone from that, but I've been working towards having sort of more nobility sort of kit. Because in Scotland we've got so many main characters and we try to portray them the best as we can, but having high-end kit is not always in the budget, but
No.
you do your best to have the sort of impression to give people the idea of what they would have looked like, and I tend to try and look more like the artwork and maybe talk about how embellished some of the stuff would have actually been.
Yeah, and medieval Scotland itself, it's kind of bereft of sources. Having tried to depict someone from 14th century Scotland for a few years myself, I found it a very difficult task.
Yeah, there's not a lot of direct sort of reference to stuff that's there for you. You kind of have to pick from other places.
Yeah, it's and which is a difficult thing to do because it's such a turbulent time, and such a time. Well, it's a place full of history and historical moments. It's something that we're briefly discussing before we started this show. The relationship between Scotland and England, and border skirmishes and obviously even before the formation of England, Roman occupation of England, and so much goes on with Scotland. It's holds such a pivotal and historical place in the formation of even of Britain. There's so little to source and so little to know.
I think it spends a long time as the sort of edge of the world.
Yeah, it does. That's right. Little's known about it, but everyone wants to know about it, I find. Particularly here in New Zealand, because we have so many people with Scottish ancestors. Everyone kind of wants to reenact their Scottish roots. So, a lot of people say, oh, I want to be a Scottish knight. And you go, oh, good. Maybe choose somewhere else, but because it's so hard to...
It's a very interesting dynamic that you sort of do over there, reenactment, compared to having it here where you can go to a castle or to a museum that's got stuff in it, compared to, a lot of reenactment here is in a field as well, but it is kind of a strange thing to think about. Like we were saying before the call, it's kind of strange that everyone seems to come from such a small country and disappear out around the world with that sort of connection.
Well, I guess that's a lot of people who reenact, here and in Australia, are kind of looking for a way to connect to, their history in a sense. So when someone's depicting a knight, for example, they'll say, oh, well, I did a little precursory searching in my family tree, and I might be related to X, noble, and I might, grab my heraldry from that, or, because they've got a surname and they may not necessarily, but, be related to that person, but that gives them a sense of connection to, what we used to call the motherland,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. It's really strange that Scotland got so left behind, especially when the population now in Scotland's less than most cities in England.
And it's a beautiful place. I fell in love with it, and I didn't want to leave. So
I'll have to come back.
Oh yeah, well, we just need to sort out this whole entire pandemic thing. I'm sure it'll be fine. And so we'll just have a bit more of a discussion about recreating an impression with fewer sources, because I find this really interesting. How do you manage that? You said you're recreating the Crusader Bible. Is that the only source you use, or what else do you use? Is there anything else?
We've got references to the sort of the coats of arms of the guys that were around. So you take what the armor and things would have looked like through most of Europe, and then we'll put those sort of surcoats on and shields on to give a holder impression. Quite often that's kind of what sort of the client or a castle wants us to come and be this person at that place. So you kind of have to tailor what you're doing in that sense to that to get the gig, really. So it's not the most accurate, but your individual items that you have can be more accurate, but they're usually based off things that are somewhere else.
Okay.
As you're trying to give an impression, and then you're there to tell a little bit of the story, maybe of the place, and then you can talk about things that are in the museum or that have happened around the area. But it's not the best, but I think you can work with what you've got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So really what you're doing is you're creating an impression. It's sort of like a blank canvas, one could say. And then you're adopting the trappings of that's needed for the gig.
Yeah.
If you will, which is very different to the experience that I would have, where you just build your impression. This is what I'm building, and you go to an event. So a lot of your gigs are for museums or castles.
Yeah.
And that, I guess, has led you to having to network more with other groups.
Yeah, I'm a member of several groups. Again, with Scotland being quite small, it's the same people in multiple groups on different time periods. So one group gets a gig, but it's the same people that show up, which is kind of strange. But it's kind of what happens when you've only got the population of a city. That's your reenactors.
Okay, so so does everyone do different time periods, or you're all basically? I mean, it's Scotland, so I'm kind of imagining everyone doing basically that War of Scottish Independence thing, because that's what the paying gig is, really.
That and Jacobites.
Oh yes, of course.
That's sort of is tourist based. A lot of our stuff is very tourist based. So it is 13th century, and it is Jacobites, and Vikings is popular now, so Vikings is back in.
Oh yes.
And we do have a little bit of 15th into 16th century, sort of you're onto your 16th century, your Mary Queen of Scots sort of stuff. But there's actually there's probably only a few dozen people that do late 14th century. Which is a shame. But it is the hot topics, and that's kind of what people get pulled into. But people that are into it, there's a lot of reenactors in Scotland that'll go to events down south. I'll end up at Bosworth or Tewkesbury or something like that for an event.
Mm.
I've only got sort of soft kit for that sort of event, and it's not really based on anything. It's just there's a big market down there, and I kind of want to go take part, go to the market and go shopping and come back.
Yeah. Yeah. So really, if I'm understanding this correctly, your events are really different to what I'm used to, where you're reenacting more for the tourist market. You're the bodies for the maybe I can't remember the name of it, but there's like the National Trust
National
who
Trust and
National Trust. There we go. Yeah, historic. There we go. And they'll have like, oh, this event is commemorating this castle or this battle, and
or they'll have a theme in place. They'll have an idea of what they want for the event. The themes have been weird over the couple of years. I can't remember what the last one was. Like waterways and things like that they're sort of pushing, and they'll be in line with something that's going on in a documentary somewhere or something. They'll be going on about all the water in the country, and then they want the stuff to be based on around boats or just they get some ideas like that, and then we try and figure out what they want their sort of sometimes the performance to be, or like maybe we want to tailor what we talk about to be sort of based on that. They do have a big influence on it, for better or worse.
So you have less private events or less events that are geared towards just enjoying the living history side of things.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. But a lot of that's down to actually having so many weekends in the summer.
Yeah,
because it is very seasonal.
Yeah, it is.
And then we've got events on every other weekend, and then to try and fit in one that's just for fun would be maybe the thing. It's actually quite a narrow one where there's nothing on, which is a shame. I would like to see more sort of like almost, I don't know, like LARP style or SCA style, where they set up and it's really for you, and you go along to it and enjoy it and just do crafts and things like that. But the gigs are there, and you want to go to these castles and set up, and thousands of people show up for them. Like it's quite insane, and they're in this small castle, and you're there, and you're just bombarded with people for sometimes just pictures all day. But it is enjoyable. But it does, like, there is a bit of dynamic, because a lot of the gigs are paying gigs, and you get paid, so certain people will go and get paid for the gigs, and they don't put so much into their setup, and they've got they're just catering for the clients, and then cost effectiveness sort of thing. But it is what it is, and reenactment has a sort of constant improvement everywhere at the moment. I think it's constantly improving. So everything is getting more accurate, and we're gearing up towards that, and the shows are changing. What the people that are putting the shows on want is developing as well, so it can only get better. But it has been very much 80s 90s reenactment dragged on for a long time, because we had the movies that came out and the things like that, and that's that castle, and they would do the film there, and then they'd be like, that's what we're marketing this year.
I think the Lord of the Rings, for example, really informed how reenactment was perceived. Everyone was like, oh, well, is it like Lord of the Rings? And then obviously the next thing came out, now Vikings, as you said, is the next thing. Everyone's like, oh, is it like Viking? When my colleagues or people who at work or people who aren't my reenactment friends hear that I'm a reenactor, the first thing is like, oh, you like Vikings? Do you hit each other with swords? I'm like, oh, well, I'd rather not be associated with the television show, thanks.
I do have interest in sort of thoughts on the dynamic of the TV show, and even like sort of lower quality reenactment, that the impact is kind of like marketing, regardless of if it's good or bad, or the TV show is good or bad or accurate. I think you'll find the audience, Like that, the show, people love it for different reasons, but people that are
Mm.
actually interested in the history will still go find the history if that's what sparks their interest. If
Well,
you know what I mean.
absolutely. Yeah.
So
It's a
if someone
gateway,
comes along
right?
to the event, yeah, it's a gateway, and like that's part of why I started my page. Like I might be there reenacting 13th century, but I'll tell
Mm.
them about Reenactment Scotland, and they'll go off and find Jacobites or Vikings or Picts or something. You know, they'll go find that because that's the gateway.
Yeah.
You know, and if they're into the TV show and they ask about the TV show and they, you know, but I think there's a lot of sort of back and forward between people going like, oh, that's not accurate, that's terrible. But it's kind of like if they're actually interested, they'll find what they want to find. But if they're not, then the show's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that leads us into something that I did want to talk to you about is that you obviously set up Reenactment Scotland, which I guess is a portal to networking or getting people into reenactment in other groups. Was there was there a need for that? Was there nothing before?
Came through sort of a frustration with there's only a handful of 3 or 4 sort of decent sized events in Scotland, and there's just like that's it, 3 or 4, and there's nothing else, and all the rest are small, like 10 to 20 people and showing up at a castle, and then that's for the weekend that you'll get a gig with your group. And there's only these 4 big events, and these big events, I was going along to them. I've been involved in reenactment for only about 2 years, and went along, and these would be packed. There'd be thousands of people there, and then I would go along to the small castle the week later with my group, and there'd be a guy walking his dog, and someone maybe popping around with the kids that were going for a walk anyway, and I'd be like, this is strange. Like, how did they not get the crowd from there to here? And I was like, there should be a page that, and it wouldn't just be there'd be National Trust and Historic Scotland gigs and local council gigs, and I was like, there should be a page that just lists all of these. They should all just be in one place, and then people would follow that page, and then it'd be like, let's go to that this weekend. And because I really believe that as much as we're into history, 90% of people with their kids are just looking to something to get them out of the house for the weekend,
Yeah.
whether it's educational or not. So I wanted them to find it and come along, and I just went, I'll just do it. I'll just make a Facebook page and then start telling people about it. And it had an impact like straight away. And then Historic Scotland National Trust sort of like, they sort of came on board, not like interacting with me, but they came on board to the idea of advertising their other events sort of more on Facebook and stuff. And then I started sharing them across, and I just compiled them all. And then I built a website where I could compile them and then list all the groups so people could start finding the groups and following the groups. And then I more recently expanded it to 2 years ago now, expanded it to have lists of traders that have been sort of recommended to me. So they're all like quite high end or good sort of entry sort of reenactment suppliers, crafters. Still trying to rebuild it again to do that differently, so it's a little bit easier. And then I can add pages like yours and things for, I want to build it into a sort of reference database so people can find pages for research and discussing things. And yeah, but it's a lot of work to build stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to make it more international, like so people can, because I've taken over Reenactment UK now as well, sort of.
Right.
We started about the same time, but we didn't find each other till later on, and then there's only one person running that as well, really. And I've they made me a main admin, and they kind of want to take a sort of more of a back seat. So me and another guy are going to sort of take over that as well and give it a format, and then maybe I can work towards having the website set up to have all the groups in the UK on it, which is crazy ridiculous because it'll be 20 times as many groups.
Oh yeah, wow.
I think it's getting the format right, because I'm still not quite happy with the format. But once the format's right, there's no reason why I can't keep expanding the website to have groups come forward and almost register themselves, and then can be like, depends how much space I have to take up. It already costs me, I don't know, £150 a year to run the website or something. I just it's out of my pocket, so it's like, it's only £10 a week.
Yeah. Only £10 a week.
I mean £10 a month. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but I guess that's about, obviously why we do a lot of this is that we're passionate about our communities, and we're passionate about what we do, and I kind of try to explain it to people. It's no different than someone being really passionate about their local football club or their services league, or their bingo bingo club. I want to say bingo club. I know that's not the right term. Or their church organization, where people will put in a lot of unpaid labor and donate money to, because they're passionate about it, and they want to see it grow and thrive.
I've actually often sort of argue with people that it's cheaper than doing a lot of other hobbies, even though I've spent thousands of pounds on it. Because if I was going to the football every weekend, how much would a season ticket cost me? Or how much would the travel to that cost me? And how much would the beers in the pub cost me?
You should get into restoring cars.
Yeah. Just anything like that. And even going to the pub every weekend to watch the rugby, you would spend, £30-40
easy,
maybe easy on one day. More than that. It's been a while since I've been to the pub for a session. Yeah, it's just interesting that people seem to think it's really expensive, but if you start adding it up, it is, if you add it up like accumulatively. But if you add it up after you travel to an event, you maybe pick up a 4-pack of beer or something that you might have on one of the nights. And you probably won't. I won't really drink them. I'll buy 4 and then I'll sit and drink 1.5 or something. And I'll be like, that's kind of me. I'm quite relaxed these days with that sort of stuff. It's just, it's nice to have one round the fire for me.
Yeah, rugby's quite big over here. I speak to the people who play rugby, and I ask them what they spend on rugby every year. And, with the shoes and the uniforms and the team fees, and they're easily dropping $1,000, maybe $2,000.
Yeah.
Easily. Like, those shoes are not cheap.
The thing is, a lot of it with the reenactment stuff, once you've got it, and then you're adding to it. But it's your main harness is going to be a fortune. But hopefully you don't grow out of it too soon. But
it's exercise. You just have to keep training. So that's the trick, right?
That's actually another point. Reenactment's kind of taken over my life, and I actually go out and exercise now because I've kind of got over the hump of like training competitively and everything, like I did in my early 20s, to like being in my 30s and not being that arsed about that. Sorry, I didn't, and not being that bothered about training and things like that. But now that I'm really into reenactment, I want to stay in good shape to go do reenactment and look right in my armor.
That's important.
It's kind of,
yeah. As someone who's no longer in their 30s, I can assure you, staying fit is important. That's a life lesson, kids.
And your approach to staying fit has to change as well. That's something I'm always telling people now that because I went through injuries from rugby and stuff actually. To like training all out and being in great shape, to trying to train all out and having injuries and then failing constantly, and then you have to change the way you think about training to just being like moving every day and eating right, and then but you can still eat what you want. Just you just got to be crazy with your calories and then stay in shape.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm still recovering from a frozen shoulder. It's just not cool. Injured my shoulder in sword fighting, in fact, and now I've got a frozen shoulder, which is, you've just got to. It can take a year to fix. So that's cool. Sword fighting. Who knew? Who knew that sword fighting can injure you? But you're right. Like there's so many different facets to the hobby, and obviously, like all physical things, it favors the young. But I think that if you're sensible, when you start to move on in life, there's no issue. I think doing it if you're being sensible. I don't put on harness and fight much anymore, but that's just due to other issues. But I've known people well into their 50s who are very physically active, who still put on full harness and go out there and trounce people, half their age, and I'm all extremely impressed.
I like having the armor and stuff. I think my interests have changed since the beginning of reenactment. Like you come for the fighting a wee bit and then stay for the crafts and things and the research. I think a big part of it for me is actually, again, from the 20s to the 30s thing, is like once you've finished with college and school, you're like, oh, that's over, I don't have to study anymore. And then I studied sort of engineering stuff as well, so it was really boring. Well, I found it interesting, but it was very stale. Like, it was facts and numbers and everything like that and stuff I needed to know. And then I went into and that had been a few years at college, and at school I studied everything, and it was really interesting. And I think once you get into your mid-20s, you get past that, and you stop having this need for knowledge anymore. Or you don't have time to go looking for this knowledge. And when I came across reenactment, and I loved sort of Vikings and knights as a kid, I was obsessed, but you never found a reason to study it. And when I came across reenactment, I could look up all that stuff, and I was like, this is amazing, this is crazy, I can't wait to speak to other people that are into this next weekend at this event. I was reading this book and it's mental, and you just that's the part of the fun of it for me. I'll go away, read something, or I'll make something, and the satisfaction from sitting down and hand sewing something, my first bit of kit sort of sewing machine, and then I hated the sewing machine and I couldn't do it, and I was making a mess, and I was like, I'm just going to learn to hand sew. And then I went, got some really nice material, and eventually, only 2 years ago, started properly hand sewing, and I made a few things out of blankets, hoods and stuff, just to figure out patterns, and then made the tunic. But the satisfaction from finishing it, actually making something, which is, again, I think something a lot of people don't get now with sort of desk jobs and everything, the satisfaction from making something is huge, because you're like, my tunics are dead basic, they're all early medieval and high medieval, they're just plain, nice colors and easily made, but the satisfaction from completing something is I made that. Took me days, but I made that.
Exactly. And no, I agree. And when you've accomplished that process, and then you get to wear it, and knowing that it's yours, and you've been involved in that whole entire process, it's deeply rewarding.
I was going to say your videos are really helpful for that sort of stuff as well.
Oh, great! Really glad to hear that. That's obviously the goal. So, talking about why people reenact, one of the things that we've talked about is you did a survey, and of obviously groups in your area of why people reenacted or are reenacting, should I say. And I found that deeply interesting, because there was such a wide range of responses, and also people from huge walks of life. People who are historians and archaeologists, obviously looking to recreate societies and the material culture of the time, and to people who are laborers, and housewives, what's normally classed as everyday people, not academics, people who aren't approaching it from an academic point of view, but they were also saying that they were interested in it from an academic point of view, and people who just love it for the social aspect. At the same time, the people who are coming at it from a academic point of view, because you were talking about what you miss most about reenactment during COVID, because obviously lockdown, it's affecting people. Everyone was saying that what do they miss most is the social aspect, or getting out there and being involved. Just what I would call getting in the thick of it.
Yeah.
I find that really interesting. Would you like to talk a little bit on that?
Yeah, I do think like it's kind of odd because we are an odd bunch, and especially in Scotland with a small population, it's that we're so spread out, and then like not being able to have contact with someone locally is bad enough. But when your mate's hundreds of miles away that you would often see every weekend, is kind of extra layer of isolation to it. But the survey came about from, there was this lass at Edinburgh Uni emailed me and asked about doing a survey, or asked me all these questions that I didn't really have the answers to, and our questions weren't that great. And I was like, this is the opportunity here. I'll sit down with you and we'll figure out what the questions should be and what you're after. And we came up with the list of questions that you've seen, and yeah, we kind of put it out, and it went a little bit viral because I was expecting maybe 50 people to fill it out, and then it went to 100, and now it's at like 500 and something people. I was like, that's too much information. I wish I'd asked cleaner questions so I could clean the data, because I tried to capture people's ages and things like that, and I asked that in a way which would like in 10-year slots, so it would break it down neatly and I could sort of look at that. But I asked how long they've been doing reenactment as an open question, and it's all like random year numbers, and I'm like,
yeah.
I should made that formatted.
Yeah.
But people put years in that they'd started. And I was like, oh, no. But it's strange. A lot of the majority of the answers were kind of what I expected, but the people that went into depth kind of reassured how I felt about the hobby. And the people that really thought about it kind of broke it down in the same way I've tried to break it down, because I often like to step back and try and look at the hobby from the outside. It's a thing, and I think it's important to do that, because a lot of people are quite obsessed with like, is the hobby for fun, or does it have to be educational? And I'm like, of course it's for fun. Like, I wouldn't do anything like this if it wasn't fun.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's way too much effort to do it if it wasn't fun.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not a job. I mean, but that aside, everything should be fun, right? Like, if you're not having fun, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
And I have that conversation all the time. Like, if you're not having fun, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
Why are you torturing yourself? What perverse sense of duty do you have? That you're not enjoying this.
I'm always telling people, find the aspect that you enjoy, and then like pursue that as much as you can and work around that. I would much rather see someone like not in the best kit or anything, but really knows their stuff about what they want to talk about, because I always say that, like, I stick to stuff that I like mainly, and I want my other stuff to look good, but the enthusiasm comes across, and you'll infuse people that are with stuff that you're enthusiastic about. Because no one wants what dry history pretty much is someone reading from a book, or someone there and stuff not interacting very well because they don't want to interact about the stuff that they're getting asked about. But get about what you like, and then people get excited about that, because you can go on for ages about what you like.
Yeah, exactly. I guess it's a sense of people have a really dim view of history because they had history delivered to them in school in a really boring fashion. And like I had a really good history teacher in school who really loved history, but it was still delivered in that date, name, person, did thing. And only when that was deviated from did the lesson become fun. And
I do feel that formal education of history, like I didn't even do history in high school. We touched on it in primary school and went through all the major events in Scotland and all the fun stuff that made it creative. But in high school it was so dry, and it was all very much pre-war Germany, and I was a bit like, oh, this is dreadful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, you know, I find it more interesting now. I've met quite a lot of World War One, World War Two reenactors that made it interesting, but I was like, oh,
Yeah.
it's just depressing.
Yeah.
But but that formal way of doing education, I think it just there's no point. People barely retain it as well, and
That's right.
I don't think there's much benefit to it having it in schools to a certain extent as well. But that's probably, you know, yeah, no, it's controversial, I guess. Yeah,
Well,
I think it's more important for us to make people enthusiastic about history than it is to educate them about history, because they might not retain what you tell them, but they'll be excited by what you look like and what you've told them, and then they'll go look into it further and they'll look at stuff again. Or when they're in that class and that thing and stuff's getting read out to them, they'll think about what we'd said or what we were wearing and the you know, the stuff that was there, and then they'll pay attention, maybe, hopefully.
Well, exactly right, and that's I believe is one of the important roles of the reenactor, is to bridge that gap between the academic, well, you know, not necessarily the academic side of history, but the classroom version of history that they're being taught, and the connection from themselves and history. History is applied to the real life, because you know, I don't ascribe to the great man version of history, you know, and sadly, sorry.
It's the sort of everyday man history that's quite interesting. Sorry, I was gonna say I quite often like identify with, like, people always talk about how things are so different back then, and they've got this weird sort of conception that everything was really different. And I always kind of line up the fact that everyone's was the same, but most of the thing with knights and Vikings and everything is kind of like gangs and people rolling around kind of being their own law and doing what they want. Which is what I find interesting. It's like everyone is like an immature man with lots of power. And regardless if they've been sort of held up as this good guy or, you know, great person, you're like, nah, he's just a, you know, power hungry thug.
Yeah.
He's got a few lads around him and he's going off to do whatever he likes. And then, you know, the code of chivalry and stuff's kind of trying to rein that back in with the church, and they're like, no.
Exactly. it's the decentralization of power and the fall of the state. Here's okay, everyone. Here's the Popula Urbanum history lesson. And when in the 14th century and the 15th century, we start to see the re-emergence of the state and the centralization of violence, essentially, because that's how the state maintains order, from the decentralization of power in the hands of these roving gangs of knights back into the hands of the state, which is ostensibly the monarchy, and you see that through the collapse of feudalism. Watch our video on the crisis of feudalism for a better explanation. Thank you. But yeah, the roving gangs, right?
It's the mob, and then mob gang heads on below them. Like, you're like, I'm going to start my own mob.
That's right. That's exactly right. We have a concept of the knight being this paragon of virtue, but that's carried on from the mythology of things like, you know, King Arthur and you know, the mythology that they were taught on how to be a good person, the lessons that they were being, you know, taught to try to rein in their excesses. So the mythology of chivalry and courtly behavior. So that's why you have these myths and legends about, you know, like Roland and King Arthur and Gawain and Lancelot, and how if they start acting like not good guys, everything falls apart, right? And sacrifice, because it's saying, well, if you be good, we maintain order, but if you mess up, if you act sinful, it falls apart.
Yeah. You can see it in stuff in the laws as well. Like they've got laws against this and laws against that.
Yeah.
Like with the clothing and things, and that's because people were doing those things.
Yeah.
And that like people were still excessively doing that. I think you were recently talking about the fact that people would pay the fine because that was like showing that they. Sorry,
oh yes. Oh no, exactly. So like, fines a perfect example of a penalty for the rich, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you would get a fine, they would pay the fine. So say for example, and they would do it. So and they would just keep on doing the behaviour. So sumptuary laws are often used in reenactment as a example of what not to do.
Yeah,
I say sumptuary laws are an example of what they did, and to understand what the sumptuary law is. So say, for example, someone says, oh, you can't wear this hood because this hood was worn by, say, for example, prostitutes. And you say, well, okay, but that's that one city for that one period. And to understand the sumptuary law, how long was that actually in effect for? Because that's not all cities, it's for all periods, right? Yeah. Sumptuary laws were often passed down by the church. So the church would pass sumptuary laws, and that's obviously to rein in what they viewed as moral excesses. But then you also have sumptuary laws being passed down by the nobility, because their clothing was a way that you could identify very quickly of what social status somebody was, right? And then obviously as the middle class get wealthier, they start dressing like the rich. So then you can't tell if someone's actually aristocracy or not. So then the aristocracy start passing laws to say, well, no, stop this. We don't want you dressing like us. So they start passing sumptuary laws to say, okay, well, unless you're aristocracy, you can only do this. But if you're a merchant and you make them out this amount of money, you can still dress like us, because they obviously need the wealthy elite.
It becomes a tax.
Yeah, essentially it's a tax, right? Yeah, that's right.
Creates misconceptions, though.
That's right. The wealthy merchants who run a lot of the cities also start passing sumptuary laws to stop the landed aristocracy from the country coming in and dressing too fancy, because the merchant elites are very modest. So they're passing laws against the landed aristocracy. So that's my rant about, sorry. Yeah.
It's interesting how misconceptions come around. It's like there's a good one in Scotland's that the Tartan Ban. It's not actually got a massive amount of history around the fact that it was never really pursued or enforced to a certain extent. But I've not actually read too much into it. But it is a law that was made, but I don't think it was necessarily enforced. But there's a big, all over the world, they're like, tartan was banned in Scotland, and you're like,
right,
technically, but in reality, like it's one of those. But I don't know enough about it to go into depth about it. But I think if you were to look, I don't think there's a lot of enforcement. Because how do you enforce? That's what everyone's wearing. Nobody's got any money. It's just just those things.
I mean, so I guess that's one of those things that is obviously we see perpetrated by reenactors as well. Without doing our own research. I hate that. I actually hate that phrase. Do your own research. But without
the difference between what you think you know and what you actually. There's a lot of discrepancy there, because the stuff that you've retained or been told, and reenactment's full of reenactors that have been around for a while, or they've not done a massive amount of research, or they'll tell you things, but because they're a reenactor and they've got the kit, you'll retain that and pass it on, and that's the whole term reenactorism really comes from. It's like,
Yeah.
it's stuff, information that's hung about and keeps getting passed along.
Yeah. And that's why being rigorous in our research and documenting why we've come to our conclusions. You know, I don't think it's helpful to go around source checking each other.
No.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, how did you come to that conclusion?
Again, you keep it about yourself almost. Like if you talk about what you're interested in, what you've researched, and what you like, they'll come to their own conclusions or look into more what you're into. It's like positive reinforcement.
Well, that's right. Yeah, that's right. You know, I think if somebody is passionate about what they know, and demonstrates what they know well, it's telling, you know.
Yeah. It's also, I've said to a few people, if you have accurate stuff, your impression has depth. Where if you don't, then there's no depth. So like that's the end of the story. Like, like if you've got a dagger and you're like, can you tell me more about this dagger? And I'm like, no, it's a dagger.
Yeah.
And then I've got my dagger, which is one of the things I recently got. I got a Todd Cutler dagger that's based on a dagger that's in the London Museum, and it's from the period, and there's all these art depictions that you can clearly tell that it's like this dagger style. And I'm like, there's more to it. Like, that's it. You know, but it's the end of the story if it's just a dagger.
Yeah.
Or, you know, or if it's just the tunic that you've machine sewn, and it's, you know, that's just the tunic. And I'm like, I've hand sewn that and I've used this stitch, and you can show them the stitch, and it's depth. There's depth there. And they're like, how long did it take you to sew? And I'm like, oh man, like 3 days non-stop. Like,
yeah.
And then you go on about how you can get the materials together, how you would weave it. It's just there's so much depth there. But if you've not got particularly accurate kit, or you've just, you know, bought something off the shelf, that's the end of the story.
Yeah, and understanding if not being able to give too many sources, at least trying to understand the historicity of items is important. You know, because there's a lot of things that we use. I call medieval shorthand or reenacted shorthand. You know, the further back we go, it's harder to be able to source accurate information. You know, like so you just kind of go, oh, we've got images of these things. We know what they are, but there's none extant. So we kind of just use a bit of a short, you know, hand waving. It's a thing, you know, like it's a thing. We know they had them. We don't know exactly what it is, but you know, made a guess, made an accurate guess.
Also, always make a point of saying that I don't know something.
Yes.
Where a lot of reenactors, I always get like, you know, when they say authenticity as well, I'm like, I hate the word. It's accuracy. You need to say accuracy. But when they say that we don't know this, and they make it like no one knows this. Like, and I'm like, oh, don't say that.
Yeah. Someone might know. You just don't know. It's like, I don't know. I've made a guess. You know, I've made my best guess, and that's okay as long as it's informed, right? Yeah. So I think we'll just move on here. I think we've talked about that type of thing. Well, one thing I did also really want to have a bit of a chat about is networking. You've done you've done a bit of networking. We've touched on it a little bit, but a lot of your networking stuff, I think small groups or, you know, countries, you know, lots of areas don't necessarily network well or at all. What advice could you give people? Because I know you've got obviously your YouTube channel. You put up videos of other groups and things like that as well.
I think with any sort of project, if you're going to set out yourself to try and improve it, it always starts with sort of a good spreadsheet. Like everything starts with a good spreadsheet. So, but the best, like if you were going to start doing it, I would say start a spreadsheet, start taking down names of groups, websites, anything that you come across, and put it in categorize it by time period and just start building this spreadsheet. And then, it might seem like a lot of work. Every group you come across, you get a note of a phone number and a name, and you start compiling that, and then follow them on their social media. And then you might come across somebody else that's got that spreadsheet sort of as well, and then you can add to it, and then go from there. But the Reenactment Scotland, once I built the website, that was kind of me just constantly updating it. But if anyone wants to build a website like that and they can get in touch, I can tell them sort of how it works and walk them through it now. It's been a massive learning curve. But I would just start collecting the information, because I went for 2 years without collecting any of the information. And if someone has to do it, that's kind of where, like, if it's no one's going to do it and you keep suggesting it, you have to do it. You have to be the person to go and do it. I've got spreadsheets with like loads of links to all different YouTube channels and things like that. I just start compiling it, and I'm like, if anyone asks me like, oh, where can I find out about this, and I'm like, I'll check my spreadsheet. But other than networking, if you can use, it used to be slightly better Facebook, but you can you can just share events as much as you can to group pages and other things like that. The add event feature is something a lot of people don't know about. Like, if you've created a page for your group and then the organizers created the event, you can add that event to your page. And a lot of people don't do that, and they'll create their own version of the event and things like that. And you can also, if you see a big event and you've got your small event there, you can copy the link to that and put it in the feed of the big event. And that's something I do all the time, like sneakily. Like, Historic Scotland will have their massive event, and I'll take the small event that's like a National Trust or a council event, and it's like nearby, so I'll pop it in the feed, and anyone that's like probably going to that might see it and then go along. Just constantly just cross share things. That's the best way to get people to come to your events. And one of the main focuses I have with the Reenactment Scotland thing is when I build the event on the website, I make sure to put links to the groups, and I sometimes take links from the Facebook groups as well, their thing, and put it into the feed of the event, even if it's a big organizer, because sometimes they don't write what groups are there. I'll put that in so people can discover the group. And the same for traders and things that I know are going to be at this event. I'll put it across. Some of them have got better at doing themselves, but I go out of my way to do it quite often, because I'm like, who's there? And people email me, tell me they're there as well, to put on the website. So I'll go do their social media a little bit for them as well. But there's limits to that as well, like how much I can do. But
have groups that you've been working with as part of Reenactment Scotland found any increase of membership or exposure because of your project?
Definitely, massively for some of them. Some of them have gone from quite small groups to being one of the biggest groups in the country, I think now. just from the way they were sort of spread out, and they didn't realize that tons of people in that area were interested in getting involved, and people thinking that they could get involved, because again, our setup's slightly different. With it being at a castle and being a Historic Scotland event or a National Trust event, we're paid, so and then the setup is almost like, might look kind of professional, and they think that people that are coming that are tourists think that we're there every day or every week, so they think that's a job, not necessarily something you can get involved in. It's because that's the different change in dynamic from here to, I guess, what you guys do a little bit, because it maybe not seen so much as a hobby sometimes, and even by the people that do it. Some people do this as a job here because they are there every week. So that dynamic changes that way.
Okay. And so your advice would be to anyone that is running a group, I guess, is to get on social media if they're not already.
And cross-share and share your group and post constantly. That's the thing about social media. It's a river, and you need to keep
Yeah.
stuff into it because it's gone once it's out there. It's no one's going to see it 2 days later. It's
Yeah.
it's become more and more like that as well. It used to be stuff would kick about for weeks, and you'd see
Yeah.
the same post again, but now it's like one post and it's gone.
Yeah.
So you need to post constantly.
Yeah.
But you don't want to post the same thing as well all the time. You see some people doing that. That's definitely a mistake. And you want to make sure a lot of the information is there. We've seen so many groups, which is like as a bad thing. Like the older generation of people will make a poster that has none of the information on it that you want, and then post it as a picture, and then you're like, that doesn't tell me where it is, parking or a link, or like that's no good to me. It's just a photo that tells you you're going to be at this castle that weekend. You're like, what time?
Yeah. So I mean, it's the number one rule of promotion: what, when, where, and how. Right.
It's getting better. It's like anything else. It's constant improvement. And we'll get to a point, in a couple of years where it'll all be fantastic online. All the information will be there, and and reenactment will get more accurate, and the shows will develop. I'm looking forward to shows developing a bit more. There's still very much two equal sides, and a couple of individual battles, and then one half falls down.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's a performance. It's 20 minutes long.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that I've been banging on about for years, about how, in the context of quote unquote battles, how could they be better? Say, for example, if someone was to, say, for example, do a knightly impression, to have a formal deed of arms, in the sense that you could have a knight in a tent. Now, this is feel free to steal this idea, internet, because I no longer can do this. This was like my grand goal. I would love to see someone do it, but you have a knight in a tent. They go out and declare that they're taking challenges to the event. Other knights are out in their tents or whatever else in the event, and they send out their responses, so that the knight in the tent has a herald. He goes out and declares challenges to be taken. Those knights send responses. That knight is just sitting in their tent all day, and there's a list set up, and those knights come and fight, issue formal challenge, be it 3 blows, however the challenge is issued, and he takes challenges, and it just goes on all day, and that knight just sits in their tent in their armor all day. So you have to be pretty fit, but that would be a period accurate way in which to display formalized knightly combat, as opposed to 10 guys each side or 20 guys each side, whatever way, and just run at each other. I mean, and that looks good for the crowd, right? Like, because you can, 1 o'clock, the battle happens, everyone run, fall over.
Yeah, but it feels like it drags on too long as well. Like 20 minutes is too long for smashing together. I've done tournament style setup before with people. It takes the right people though. Like you kind of have to be a little bit better at sword fighting and stuff. And we did it with placards that you could break. Like we got quite breakable wood, thin wood, and put it on our arms. Did it like that. So it was half and half. Like it's not particularly accurate, but it was fun for us, and it was entertaining. And we set up like kind of like each of us had a dynamic to our character almost. I was sort of like young and enthusiastic, and I was semi-kitted up, and then you've got like an old knight, and we had older guy obviously, and then we had like well-established knights that were kind of like going around quite cool, and then we had like really nervous like knight, and we kind of played off each other, and we even adapted our fight style to be like that. Like I thought, like quite flashy, and those doing sort of cocky things, and being overly cocky. And then the knights were like sort of trying to make me take it seriously, and then like the nervous guy was like really defensive, so everyone was being quite aggressive with them, so it made a really good sort of performance. But we were actually sparring, but we were just sparring in a style that we'd set up for each character, which is something I've toyed about with a couple of the guys that we've talked about. Like, if you want to make your historically accurate fighting entertaining, you have to be, I don't know if you've read the sort of things about, well, you have to be like nimble on your toes, and we're fighting styles like that. Like, you have to be sturdy like an elephant, but nimble on your toes. Like, you see that diagram with the elephant with little twinkly toes, and, and you have to be aggressive like a lion, but you have to be able to retreat. And we'll fight in a style where you constantly retreat or constantly attack. And then it's like I think we actually penned the name of the mar. We called it Theatrical Hema.
I love it. It's brilliant.
Because we're not actors. Like, reenactors are not actors, and we're not. So it's like, if you can fight in a style, you can show the style more than the presence if you want. And walking around in armor gives you a sense of presence, so you just kind of act up that presence. And it's not hard to do that nervously as well if you wanted to be that character, which is quite good. It was fun. We thought we'd be more interesting because there was only 6 of us, so we had 4 proper fighting knights, and then we had sort of 2 squires, sort of sorting us out sort of style. It was quite conventional in that sense, but I thought it was quite entertaining, and it was fun for us, so it wasn't dry.
I mean, that sounds like the type of thing that would be really good to do. For the people to see what's going on and to understand the context of like how medieval combat may have happened. Because it's not all just battles.
I always think it'd be like almost more entertaining if we could have more uneven battles, because like a lot of reenactment battles seem to be very even, and I don't think uneven battles wouldn't happen. I mean, even battles wouldn't happen. Because you'd be like, that's going to be pretty bad for me and you. Let's work something out, where you might completely take advantage of another army and then they would surrender. And I think that's more the dynamic that you want to show, and then have a skirmish kind of, or it's kind of odd. I've always thought about like needing to try and plan out a show, and it's that 20-minute slot. It's always a killer. You need to plan out a show where you're not going to knacker everybody, and you want to sort of build up towards it, and it's quite hard. But I do think there's sort of a case to be made for, because the groups are quite small, to work towards having more a living history sort of combat dynamic, where your display is, your armor's there, but you're training, and it's HEMA based and educational, and everybody's doing what manuscript manuals look like for sword fighting. And I don't think there's enough of that, because you're either at a show kitted up on the field, but it's not overly educational. And then you kind of want to set that up at your tent, and you have a little arena, and you talk the crowd through basic sword fighting and the styles and the stances, and talk about it, and then actually fight each other a little bit. You can even have fencing masks there if you wanted to be safe, but it's an educational aspect to it.
I think that's good as well, because when people are out on the field fighting, it looks good, but the crowd don't know what they're looking at.
There's a handful of different types of reenactment. There's full-on sort of theatrical stage fighting, which is sort of set up where people just do a scenario of movements with their sword that's not educational at all, but it's entertaining for short periods. And then you've got mass groups that get together and they do sort of restricted rules fighting, which is a spectacle in itself when you've got enough people. And it's fantastic when you've got enough people, but when you haven't, it's still trying to fill a 20-minute slot with people. 20 people trying to do 20 minutes of that, and it's like it's hard. because
It
that's sporting and it's lots of fun to do. Because I love running around with the guy. I actually meet with a group and I do the training with them. But when it comes to the show, I'm like, I'm not that fussed.
Yeah.
I like doing it as like it's the same as I would with go do airsoft. You wouldn't do airsoft as a show.
No.
But you go run around with them and play
Yeah.
and it's great.
Yeah.
And it's good fitness and you like playing in your kit with your blunt swords. But
Yeah.
when it comes to the actual show, I would rather do something that was educational and and light kit and talk about it. But again, you need the right people. You need someone that's switched on doing it with you, and you probably need a few of you that are quite switched on doing it with you.
Yeah.
And then someone that knows how to talk about it, talking to people about it while you sort of do it. And you've got to get a handful of people that are quite trained up. And I would love to see more of the HEMA community coming across and putting on some soft kit. They don't even need to get armor with their swords and displaying it that way.
Yeah.
And get
absolutely.
more people into the hobby of HEMA and the crossover, because I don't think there's enough crossover between the two of them.
No.
No, which is a shame. But it's the same with the academics. There is academics in reenactment, but I think there's a kind of a standoff between them because reenactment is seen as a hobby, and it is a hobby, but they don't want to be associated with a lot of that stuff. Because there's a big scope of people. What would I call it? A big arc. Yeah. Scale. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
think you've hit on a really important point there. Is that reenactors enter into combat, and the way they fight is often seen as like this middle point, if you know what I mean. Like it's a middle point between HEMA and it's a middle point between like SCA rattan fighting. And I understand that they're now doing their steel weapons fighting, but it's also a middle point between that, and it's a middle point between your Bohurt HMB stuff as well.
Yeah.
And it's so, but no one wants to cross, no one wants to cross the streams between them, and I think that it does a disservice to everybody, because people say, I
think that there's a big problem with a big part of the draw for people to get into reenactment is the fighting, and the fighting is what it is at the moment, and it's trying to get people that are already doing it with 20-30 people to think about doing it differently.
Well,
they feel like that's more and more groups are getting hired for their living history and their displays, but I think a lot of the groups still think they're getting hired for the performance, and the performance is the thing that's actually scheduled into the day. Like, you're here, the displays are great, you're on at 2:00. And they think that's their slot. That's actually the slot that they're there for. But I think they need to work with the organisers maybe to change what that sort of dynamic could be as well. But people don't, change is scary a little bit, and then there needs to be some sort of transition, and it just needs a couple of people to really start driving it, and then once people see it, they'll be like, oh, we can do that, or something similar, or but it is hard, and then you got to get people out of season to try and rehearse the idea of a different kind of show or something. It's difficult.
That's really interesting, because having lived in one country which had a reenactment scene that was very focused on the tournament and combat, but also starting to transition into what we would call non-fighting displays, non-combat displays, and then move to a country that now is still very focused on reenactment is battles. It's like you go to an event and it's just battles, and no one really does anything else. And trying to get people to see reenactment as not that is it's different. It's different. And that's not to say that there isn't events where people don't do that, but that's not what you would display to the public. You wouldn't go to an event and have a non-combat display, but events are just battles, and people go to reenact to fight, and that's just the way the cookie crumbles at the moment here. And then hearing that elsewhere in the world, it's people like events are now kind of transitioning to non-combat. I mean, obviously reenactment always has been fed by people wanting to go and sword fight because that's the cool thing. That's what catches people's eye. It's always interesting to hear how different demographics and events and groups are engaging internationally.
Oh, some of the European events just look amazing. Like, I feel like our ones are so conventional, and then they've got, like, we do conform to the stereotype a lot of the time. Like in Scotland, we've got a lot of stereotypes and a lot of expectations, and because of Scottish history and things, to a certain extent, we give them what they come for. But in Europe, there's no one that's not in kit. Like, there's no public. Like, they've got whole towns that are taken over, and people that come there. It's just like, that's a dream.
I know. I see these things where even the locals are dressing up. I have to say that it's a dream. It's a dream. And I'm not even the slightest bit jealous.
I can't wait to go to France, to that castle that's on my list. Like,
Guédelon.
Oh man, like, amazing place.
I mean, that's just a quick train ride for you. Well, when I say quick,
so I can do it. I will do it. Let me know if you're doing it. I'll come meet you.
Oh well, we've just got this slight 18-20 hour flight. Why not?
I mean,
why not?
If you're going to do it for something, that would be a place to go.
Well, I have promised myself another trip back to Europe. That was on the cards, but then we had this pandemic. It'll happen. Yeah, it's definitely something. There are things that we do want to go see, and events that we want to go to. So it's definitely on the list. And I'm sure if we published that we were going to go to some events, we would have welcoming arms to visit people. What would be really good to see from communities is if they don't have something what you've set up with Reenactment Scotland is something similar. Having come from Australia, they have organisation very similar, but I know that not everywhere has. Obviously, you had to set up Reenactment Scotland because there wasn't a Reenactment Scotland before you set up a Reenactment Scotland. Obviously, not everyone has something like that. So, obviously, as you said, people can.
You just gotta start compiling the data.
And obviously reach out to you, for assistance if they need it. But
if they want the format, and they can learn from my mistakes and things like that.
The only way, I guess my philosophy is, and one of the philosophies behind why we do YouTube and assist people is the only way things are going to get better is by identifying things that we see around us and just addressing it, and for us, we saw that there wasn't any content talking about who the middle class were in the medieval period, and tutorials on how just to do some really basic sewing and medieval textiles. And so we just created it because thinking about it and talking about what must be done, someone needs to do it,
it's a lot to take on. Like,
it is.
You have to plan it out and then think about what you're going to do. And I think it takes a certain amount of mentality, especially like with the hobby that we've got. It takes so much of your time already. And then you go, there should be somewhere where you can research this or look it up. And like everyone that would give that information is already, knee deep in it.
Yeah.
They're busy with it, and they're busy with their day lives. And somebody has to go that extra. And then you've got to find the people that are willing to go that extra mile, but they haven't got the skills. And so it's like, you need the perfect storm to get it together. Like I had help with the website, and I'm not savvy with I'll make the videos and I can part of editing them, but I don't want to really be in them. Like I can't edit myself. I don't know how you do that. That would freak me out. But I'll maybe end up in more videos, and people are always asking me to do little shorts where maybe I'll talk about something, but I don't feel really comfortable doing it. And I lack a knowledge base for a lot of the stuff I'm talking about. Even at events, talking about the reenactment and the stuff I've got in front of me, I often find myself talking about the hobby, and it's odd. Like that's the way I see it, and I talk about what I get out of the hobby and this sort of stuff more than I talk about the history sometimes. But I tailor it to what I'm interested in, like I said, and that's how I infuse people with it.
Yeah. But I guess that's also important because not enough people talk about the hobby. It's just assumed that because we're in it, we all know it. And one of the things that is really interesting me is not so much the history of the hobby. I guess I want to call it the esoterica of the hobby. Like why are we doing this? What drives people to reenact? What are the reasons to reenact? And what is important about reenacting? And what can we do to make it more better? But to create more value for someone, like there, one thing that I've heard people say when someone draws in an interest to reenactment and comes in is that old phrase, there's no handbook to learn to reenact. And I think, well, that's just rubbish. There should be.
Yeah, definitely. I think a big appeal for it is definitely continued education. Because like I said, like getting back to reading things for a reason. Like there's so much information is like at your fingertips, but there's like what do I Google? Like it's like when you go into Spotify and you're like thousands of songs there, and you're like, I don't know what to listen to.
Yeah.
Right there, everything you've ever listened to or could ever listen to is right there, and you're like, no idea. Yeah. Where you're like, what's that guy doing? He's in medieval gear, and you're like, that's interesting.
Yeah.
What's he talking about? Like, I'll go look that up. I'm going to look that up. That's really interesting. And then you're like on this vein of learning all this new stuff. Yeah. It's like it's right there.
Yeah.
We need more of it on the internet, like with people making videos and things, because even I can't sit down and read things. I have to put videos on in the background while I'm working, and your stuff on in the background while I'm doing other things. Podcasts especially. I shout out to our podcast if you haven't listened to them as Rex Factor if you're really into stuff. I don't know if you've listened to them.
Oh no, but thanks for the tip.
Yeah. So they review all the kings and queens of England and then all the kings and queens of Scotland, and a point system. Decide if they've got the Rex Factor.
Right, yes.
Yeah, it's clever, and it's fun, and it's full of historical stories and facts, and it's really entertaining to listen to. It's not dry at all, because they've kind of got the perfect dynamic of someone that knows the stuff and is talking, and then the other person that he probably knows the stuff as well, but he asks about it in the right way, the questions that if you were listening, you want the answers to. So it's good. But I recommend it to everybody. Actually, I love it.
Yeah, I'll send me the link and we'll put it in the link down below.
Just start with
Yeah.
your favorite kings or something and
Mm.
listen to that one, because you don't need to listen to my particular order if you don't want to.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, I think we'll wrap it up here. Any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Not particularly, but if you're only just discovering reenactment, get stuck in and watch your way through a lot of your videos, and check out my page as well, the YouTube channel. You can catch some reenactors talking about what they love and how they got into it and things like that, and hopefully that'll inspire you.
Yeah, well, it's definitely worth watching. I'm a subscriber myself, and so I'll make sure we link your channel, your Facebook page as well. Subscribe to Reenactment Scotland, and follow on Facebook as well, everyone, if you don't already, because obviously we want to support other reenactors and their projects, and making sure that people get more exposure. That would be fantastic. So thank you so much, Dave, for popping in and having a chat.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for reaching out. And again, everybody, if you would like to be a guest on this show, please email me. The link is down below. But populaurbanum@gmail.com, or on any of our social media pages. And remember, stay safe, have fun, and keep reenacting.